Yes, we can.
I'm just thinking that I'm going to be focusing on the slides as well. Welcome, everybody. We're having a little hitch with the slides. I'm very delighted to welcome Jayne Osgood to this seminar. And she's Professor of Education focusing on early childhood. And I guess Jayne's work has been very inspirational for all of us, particularly the work you've been doing around post-human childhoods and creating a space really for us to think with and through. I'm thinking particularly of your book series, which is called Feminist Thought in Childhood Research. And I suppose the reason you're here is that your work on posthumanism and feminist new materialism has really helped us think. So that's why you're here. And we're just going to struggle a bit with these slides. And then hopefully we'll start soon. Have you sent them, Jayne?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll go in and find them, and then hopefully we'll get going.
So this does have all
Technology.
They haven't quite got through yet.
Did you say you could operate the ones that were on the screen?
Yeah, yeah, I
Shall
can.
Shall we just do that then? It doesn't matter that I can't see them. I'll just cue you and just trust that they're the right ones.
Thanks so much, Jayne, and thanks so much for coming with us to be with us and presenting your session on crafting granular stories, childlike encounters with cork. And basically, I'm really sorry that Teams again didn't rise to the challenge of helping us do the seminar. But welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to the Treescapes seminar. Just to explain our project is called Voices of the Future. It's one of those projects that's quite large, with 7 universities and 23 people, with a kind of focus really on reimagining young people's relationship to treescapes, drawing on a number of different perspectives, including feminist new materialism, but also working with scientists, with people who work on the ground, tree planting, partners like Manchester City of Trees and Mersey Forest. And we're a 3-year project, and the Treescape seminar is really about augmenting and kind of reflecting about issues arising in our project with people who can help us think. So thank you so much to Jayne Osgood for coming today, and welcome everybody. And I'm sorry about the little hiccup at the beginning of the seminar. So I'm going to hand over to Jayne, and I'm going to be, so you'll have to do the next slide bit, please, thing, Jayne.
Okay.
But thank you so much. And you're now going to talk about crafting granular stories, childlike encounters with cork, which is a lovely title. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Kate. It's really great to be here. I was slightly anxious that I might not be here, or might not be in fine fettle, because I had a COVID booster yesterday, but fortunately I'm fine, or at least I think I am. But if I have a funny turn, that's what's happened. So I won't waste any time because I've got quite a lot of ground I want to cover. But as Kate says, the title of of this presentation is Crafting Granular Stories, Childlike Encounters with Cork, and it's a fairly recent study that was undertaken kind of during the pandemic, I guess, and it's one of several that I am working on using affective methodologies in childhood studies, and it's loosely what I've termed arboreal methodologies, and I presented another paper that was around getting lost as another sort of version of arboreal methodology. So that's what I want to share with you today. And before I get started, next slide, please, Kate. This is the bibliographic reference to the journal paper, and it's in a special issue of Australian Journal of Environmental Education. And my co-author
that's enough computer now.
My co-author is Nina Odegaard, and she's based in Norway. And we're entangled in various ways, but I was one of her PhD supervisors, and her PhD was looking at aesthetic explorations with recycled materials in a Norwegian kindergarten. So that is really central to this paper, and we draw on some of the data with young children from that kindergarten. Okay, next slide, please. So in the paper, we pursue a decolonising agenda through tentacular lines of inquiry and the generation of a series of interwoven stories. And it's by queering old narratives that new and unexpected stories concerning pedagogical documentation, sustainability in inverted commas, and environmental education, also in inverted commas, and the child's contaminated connection to nature begin to emerge. So central to our storytelling is recycled natural materials found in a Reggio Emilia kindergarten in Norway, specifically cork. We're working with cork, as the title suggests, and what this does is insist that we take the non-innocence of matter to the heart of inquiries. So not accepting that cork is inert or apolitical. And we do this to illustrate the potential of feminist posthumanism to respond with situated, embodied, affective insights and provocations that might offer ways to consume, cohabit and wrestle in more careful ways with the Anthropocene ecologies that we are intricately and endlessly enmeshed with. So can I have the next slide, please? So we start in the middle with this fairly unremarkable poem that will resurface and provoke and agitate throughout this presentation. So fortune favours those who see more in me than just a tree. Look at my cork and 3 times walk before my girth for all to see. So just keep that in your mind's eye as we work our way through. As I say, it will resurface. So early childhood studies framed by feminist posthumanism argue for research as embodied and affective, and following Haraway stress the importance of situated knowledges, partial perspectives and figurative practices. Research in this key typically involves a series of unanticipated, affectively charged processes that attend to the generative relationalities of human, more than human, and other than human encounters with the everyday or unremarkable, that which we routinely take for granted in early childhood contexts. So attunement that grapples with the what else is shaped by thinking with theory, to borrow from Mazai and Jackson, through the telling of other worldly stories that underline how we might find ways to live with the precarities of life on the Anthropocene. Next slide, please. As we, Nina and I, curated and composted this journal paper, we re-encountered observations and stories from times that we had once spent in kindergartens, but we were prevented from being with each other in real time or having the pleasure of spending time learning with and from young children, as we witnessed the power of a non-human agent, COVID-19, to completely reconfigure our more than human relationships with each other and to reshape our connections to and stories of research. So as I've written elsewhere, the pandemic has drawn into sharp focus the complexities of our time and the grave limitations of human exceptionalism and the extraordinary force of the non-human to shape the world in unanticipated ways. So the Anthropocene demands that childhood researchers reappraise how and why we undertake research in the ways that we do, and what potentialities exist from embracing more speculative and tentacular approaches. So Haraway invites us to think with the Anthropocene in ways that render us responsible by retuning our ability to respond and produce forms of actionable responsibility towards ourselves, othered humans, and in that includes the young child, and more than human kin and the planet. Next slide, please. So Anna Zing and colleagues encourage that we learn new ways of storytelling that are simultaneously about human stories and histories of the natural world. And we need to tell granular stories of the Anthropocene's feral effects, which take account of it as a spatial and temporal phenomenon. Granular stories attend to questions of social justice, and that is the uneven distribution of resources and forms of violence and the natural phenomena emerging around us. Anna Zing and colleagues advocate finding ways of passing out the Anthropocene to places where differences can be sensed, observed and imagined. And this necessitates critical humanities and natural sciences coming together to focus on the feral of the ordinary that has effects beyond those that were intended. So granular stories are dystopian, but hopeful stories. And according to Zing, attuning to ferality can be thought of affectively, as she terms it, wandering mists of dread, which involves striking a balance between acknowledging the severity of the environmental challenges while remaining appreciative of the abundant feral action around us. The task then becomes to try and access with multiple skills, curiosity and passion. Next slide, please. So Anna Zing has noticed what early childhood scholars have long recognised, and that is young children's capacities for attunement and what she terms virality, this idea that young children will notice things like the grass that's growing in the sidewalk, and that they are the best observers of life as it unfolds and emerges, and the stuff that we become conditioned not to notice anymore. So in our paper, we work with Zing's granular stories of disturbance-based ecologies and with that ferality and the wandering mists of dread. And we mobilise these as a mode of inquiry that asks what we can learn, relearn and unlearn about and with the child of the Anthropocene. So we begin by tuning to the material environment of the kindergarten and grapple with the reduction of natural resources to that which is used for human exploitation and consumption, including pedagogical gain. Next slide, please. So it's by taking matter seriously, we propose it's possible to engage the child as phenomenon, as a series of past-present processes that enable worldly challenges facing planet Earth to be encountered differently. We turn to the non-innocence of early childhood pedagogy, the ferality of both nature and child, to arrive at lessons about earthly survival on a damaged planet. And this involves critical engagement with early childhood curriculum, pedagogical practices, and the predominant image of the child that's conveyed through policy and philosophy. So we attune to a specific moment at a Norwegian kindergarten, which I'll share with you now. So this is from observation notes. She stands at the threshold, peering into the room of recycled materials. She scans the room, feeling with her eyes. Each shelf hosts different materials, wide array of colours, various shapes, assorted sizes, multiple textures. Her attention is hailed. She takes a tentative step closer to one of the shelves, which displays natural materials, feathers, stones, shells, and of course, bottle corks. Her hand grasps for a feather, her fingertips touch the soft, fragile materials, and then she picks up a cold, round stone, holds it in her palm, returns it to the shelf, and then her hand hovers above a small collection of cork stoppers. She takes one. The lightness of cork is visible in her hand. She rotates the cork, inhales it deeply, rolls it over her top lip, takes a tentative bite. She digs her nail into the side of the cork, and then she pushes it against a nearby wall, and the firm resistance is visible in her body. She returns the cork carefully, one by one, arranges them in ascending size order, almost without noticing the codification. She steps away. I move forward to study her corks. I imagine that I noticed some of what she had noticed, the images and words etched upon the corks of bees, grapes, a map of South America, champagne, 100% recyclable, a star, a coat of arms and a crown. I resist picking them up, but wonder at the lightness, the texture, the feltness of these palm-sized stoppers. She turns around and asks if she can bring the corks with her to the classroom. Now, the Norwegian early childhood curriculum, much like the early years foundation stage curriculum in England, offers a very specific set of ideas about interactions with materials that go to some way to underline human exceptionalism. And curriculum materials in kindergartens are viewed as inert matter, used by adult humans to support child development. The Norwegian curriculum underscores the importance of children's right to actively participate in everyday life. So a rights-based discourse does not challenge either developmentalist logic or the emphasis on school readiness. Rather, together, they provide the cornerstones to Norwegian early childhood policy. So the enactment of National Curriculum Framework is observed at this Reggio-inspired kindergarten, which provides the foundation to our research. So the twin emphasis on linear development and human rights in the framework work to reinscribe anthropocentrism and a narrow conceptualisation of the child that rests upon a preoccupation with certainty and normativity. However, staff are particularly interested to explore the potential for recycled materials to deepen and extend the nature of early years practice. Cork is often found in Reggio-inspired kindergartens the world over on account of its closeness to nature and eco-credentials. Next slide, please. So, as this quote from Mio Reggio indicates, Mio Reggio is, for those of you who don't know, is a manufacturing firm that provides natural materials to Reggio-inspired and Reggio kindergartens, and they proclaim that cork is 100% natural, biodegradable and completely environmentally friendly, ideal for children's use because it's lightweight, waterproof, easy to clean, resistant to wear, and it's hypoallergenic, and it comes from the bark of the cork oak tree, and the extraction of the bark does the tree no harm. In fact, it does it good. It prolongs its life. And these oak forests support one of the world's highest levels of forest biodiversity. So cork is inherently good and natural and healthy and wonderful. So Reggio pedagogy involves listening, rich multisensory listening, and it insists that the pedagogue attunes to the multiple languages children use in their encounters, in this case with cork. So paying attention to that which appears to captivate children is the essence of the Reggio approach. Assessing how children learn in and through encounters with cork. The approach exceeds a narrow focus on what children learn, and rather the objective becomes to study the processes involved in the learning. And the teachers then continually explore children's way of learning through the senses, their more than 100 languages and their play. A child's curiosity with cork provides the foundation for a project of aesthetic exploration that involves the entire group, including the teacher, who further investigates the material composition of the cork, its history and its origins. A thorough engagement with the object enables teachers to better support children's curiosities and enable them to reach embodied understandings of the materials. Next slide, please. So biophilia does not attend to ferality, that is, that which is unintended, that which emerges through disruption ecologies. As Haraway argues, no material or environment is solely nature. She urges that we think with nature cultures, one word, and attend to the non-innocence of matter, place, and relationalities to the world shaped by capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and coloniality. So Zing's virality urges us to attune to nature cultures, the non-human, as processes of shifting in response to the effect of the Anthropocene. Next slide, please. So we ask ourselves, what might a deeper embodied engagement with cork make possible? And we want to propose that educators and indeed researchers in the Anthropocene might engage in disturbances that work towards redefining the trajectory of community life. It's from relations within Anthropocene disruptions that educators can take bold steps into different worlds that take account of social injustices, the ravages of capitalism, and the complexities of life on a damaged planet. So we wonder what might happen if we take material to the heart of our inquiry. Can we allow our optics to wander and so attend to the relationalities between cork and child in a worldly confederate sense? So casting back to the Norwegian preschoolers' curiosity with cork, the that is its feltness that incites haptic explorations with teeth, nails, force and velocity, can we attune to childlike capacities to notice? Doing so involves the pursuit of tentacular lines of inquiry that reach beyond and resist reinscribing narratives of biophilia and innocence, nature and purity, and so arrive at other stories, granular stories, that are disruptive and generative. Next slide, please. With Curiosities Provoked, a writing methodology began to emerge between Nina and myself that invited us to explore what else Cork might potentiate. Attuning to the feltness, embodied encounters, oral investigations, and a willingness to be open to the texture, scent, taste of the corks. What might that agitate? So we began to engage in Haraway's practice of serious play. And it was only by rummaging and foraging through our houses, through kitchen drawers and the depth of craft boxes that we were able to assemble piles of cork stoppers. So sitting there with piles of corks across the surface of our desks, we find ourselves much like the inquisitive girl rolling the cork between our fingers, allowing it to rest on our palms and capture the sun, biting down on its spongy surface and inhaling the acrid scent of old wine traces, throwing it against the wall to watch it bounce haphazardly across the room, studying the printed word etched along the side. So taking our cue for aesthetic explorations of natural materials from young children set in motion a raft of uncomfortable affects. Aside from wondering what cork is and what cork does, we were prompted to explore what and where else cork might take inquiries into the childhood of the Anthropocene. And this insisted upon a project of tracing and delving into long-forgotten colonial, heteropatriarchal capitalist histories, where the non-innocence of cork became apparent. Next slide, please. So in response to Anna Zing's invitation that we learn new ways of storytelling that are simultaneously about human histories and histories of the natural world, we arrive at 1662, when Robert Hooke, curator of experiments of the Royal Society of London, was celebrated as having discovered cork by studying it under a microscope. As a man of science, Hooke is performing Haraway's God trick, which elevates heteropatriarchal colonial knowledge production above all others. Next slide, please. Alternative accounts of cork claim that the first people to recognise the extraordinary qualities of cork lived in the Eastern Mediterranean, a considerable distance from where cork oaks occur naturally in southwest Mediterranean and northern Africa. The ancient Greek used bark of cork oak to make buoys to float fishing nets, for sandals and for stoppers of vessels. Greek philosophers from 3rd century BC discovered that one layer of cork was stripped from a tree and a new sheath of better quality was quickly formed. And later the Romans put cork to a wider range of uses, as we learn in the Virgil's Aeneid, where the infant princess Camilla is saved from capture when her father encases her in cork and flings her across the river. So we see that cork has a long and lively recorded history, which is often presented as being in the service of Braidotti's figure of the Vitruvian man. Early fishermen in Mediterranean are claimed to have used cork to fashion life jackets, and there are medicinal uses that have been recorded, especially in the treatment of male pattern baldness. For many centuries, the qualities of cork were acknowledged and celebrated as humans consumed it in myriad ways. However, it was Hooke's discovery that was provided scientific insights that explained what had been known intuitively and instinctively by indigenous communities for thousands of years. Next slide, please. Hooke was able to undertake his experiments with cork because a burgeoning trade was growing from Mediterranean and African export of the material. In fact, cork has been a significant economic asset since the 14th century to areas in Italy, Portugal, Spain and Morocco. It was first exported to England in the 1300s. And as the centuries have passed with the growth of colonial exploration and land acquisition, the increased movement of native plants and materials to other contexts began to qualitatively alter communities, landscapes and ecosystems. So as Jayne stresses, long-distance transfers, both intentional and unintentional, introduce new living and non-living things into local ecologies. Even benevolent improvement projects go awry and industrial stowaways take over. So Anthropocene ferality is spread through such introductions, and this goes back to 1300s and before. Okay, next slide, please. The poem that opened this presentation provides another example of Anthropocene ferality. So Tenterfield's lucky cork tree was brought from England in a jam tin by Edward Parker in 1861. Known as the wishing tree, the cork tree in English folklore is purported to be surrounded by magical power that brings good luck to those who observe certain rituals, dating back to the time of the Great Plague of London. So the lucky cork tree, people have come from all parts of Australia to walk around the mighty cork oak tree 3 times to make a wish. Tenterfield is a really interesting place and an interesting history. It's heavily populated by settler colonialists who were drawn to its likeness to home on account of a similar climate and landscape to England. Tenterfield is in fact located in the New England region and is home to wineries and wilderness, and is renowned as the town where Sir Henry Parkes made a speech in 1889 calling for the Federation of Australia. For many thousands of years before, the region was home to 3 main Aboriginal nations. Next slide, please. The Bundjalung and Jukumbal people were the first to inhabit the land now known as Tenterfieldshire. The Jukumbal called the area Moombaleen, meaning place of wild honey. The Guthumbal people lived in the northern part of the Shire, in and around the lush forests of the ranges straddling New South Wales and Queensland border for tens of thousands of years. Australian Aboriginal culture varies throughout the continent, and people from different regions have different ancestral rituals, tools, weapons, and art styles. Aboriginal people removed bark from trees to make canoes, containers, shields, and to build temporary shelters. Toe holds were cut into trees to make them easier to climb as lookouts to hunt possum and beehives. 10 kilometres from Tenterfield, Bluff Rock is the location of the first known conflict between Aboriginal people and the European settlers in 1844. Next slide, please. Over many decades, settler colonialists laid ever greater claim to the land, which culminated in the forcible removal of Aboriginal children from their families by federal, state government agencies and church missionaries through a policy of assimilation between 1910 and 1970. Known as the stolen generation, children were subjected to processes of assimilation, separated from their families and forced to adopt a white culture. Common Ground Australia write that the children were forbidden from speaking traditional languages or referring to themselves by their birth names. Most were placed in institutions where neglect and abuse were common, and some were adopted by white families and used for domestic work. In Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, children are considered sacred, and kinship systems ensure close-knit communities. Separation from kin and witnessing abuse of children was devastating for Indigenous communities across Australia. Furthermore, the transfer of knowledge and oral culture between generations was disrupted, which had a devastating impact on the continuation of deep cultural knowledge. So then the celebration of the lucky cork tree takes on an altogether different complexion when storytelling accounts for human histories of those othered, and histories of the natural world, also othered through processes of white supremacy and colonialist brutality. The Tenterfield Shire Council Tree Management Plan of 2021 indicates the continued centrality of the cork oak trees to that area. Although cork is not harvested in Tenterfield, it has an economic value nevertheless for its capacities to increase tourism in the area. The aesthetically pleasing cork oak trees are also a powerful reminder of the lasting presence of settler colonialism and the barbaric treatment of children from Indigenous communities that lives on in intergenerational trauma. So the non-innocence of Cork resurfaces here as a timely reminder of our responsibilities to attune to the what else when storytelling attends to disturbance-based ecologies. Next slide, please. Such storytelling of the non-innocence of trees takes us back to Norway, this time in the 1960s, to a benevolent improvement project that went wrong. There was a reforestation programme introduced to stall the effects of climate change throughout the 1960s. At the time, 100 million Norway spruce trees were planted annually, with much of the tree planting undertaken by school children as part of education programmes designed to raise awareness about environmental sustainability. So this human intervention exceeded intentions because growth seasons have extended due to climate change, notably a warmer, wetter climate, increased concentrations of carbon dioxide and nitrogen deposits from the air. So the proliferation of spruce, fir and birch trees pose a direct threat to the survival of ancient oaks and the ecosystems that reside within hollowed out trees. So at one time, oak forests covered large parts of southern Norway, but in the 1500s and 1600s, they were felled and sold as part of capitalist extractivism across Europe as a national, a lucrative national commodity. So today, the few remaining oak trees across Norway are under threat from the proliferation of new spruces, pines and other types of vegetation, which are growing between the old oaks and creating shade, interrupting ecosystems and ultimately hastening their death. So the Norwegian landscape is now dotted with hollowed out centuries-old tree on the verge of extinction. There are hundreds of insects, lichen and fungi that live in the hollowed oaks. And this phenomenon is referred to by biologists as extinction debt, where the future extinction of a species is caused by long gone past events. So tree dwellers, insects, lichen, fungi risk paying the ultimate price of extensive tree felling 500 years ago. They face extinction because they have insufficiently adapted and are out of balance with their surroundings, rather than struggling to cope with the more current disturbances caused by fossil fuel burning humans. So what we're seeing here is the complex unfurling and infolding of human intervention, albeit well-meaning on some occasions, extractivism and intense commodification over centuries. Resulting feral effects are a powerful reminder of the limitations of capitalist logic that fail to fully grasp the effects and consequences of anthropocentrism. Close attunement to these tree dwellers holds potential for a pedagogy that can provide insights into finding ways to live and die together. Next slide, please. So the contemporary cork industry is a global enterprise worth over $4 billion. Portugal, Italy and Spain and France play an important part in the industrial utilisation of cork. Portugal is the world leader with hundreds of factories employing tens of thousands of workers to produce products from cork stoppers, wine stoppers, to printing paper, cigarette tips, bath mats, fishing rod handles, and indeed space rocket insulation. So although cork oak can now be found in various corners of the earth, it's native to Southwest Europe and Northwest Africa, where it's suited to the climate there, characterised by abundant and evenly distributed rainfall, short summer dry periods, and tempered atmospheric humidity, while mild winters and so on. So the trees in the right place support diverse ecosystems and hence are protected species, with harvesting processes heavily legislated and regulated, which prohibit stripping trees more than once every 9 years. The forests sustain a rich biodiversity as well as continuing to provide major source of income to local communities. Yet cork oak forests are increasingly under threat from human-mediated disturbances such as poor or inappropriate management practices, adverse environmental conditions, as we saw ourselves this summer with prolonged drought periods, and pathogen and pest attacks. These adverse factors interact to cause an assemblage of feral disturbances, more and other than human claim space and agency. The increasing scale and process of capitalist extractivism has depleted the forest and created conditions and possibilities for feral disturbance-based ecologies to unfurl. So as we saw from Mio Reggio, it's widely proclaimed that cork extraction from oak trees does not damage the tree. This might have been the case when artisans painstakingly removed bark from each tree with great care and sensitivity. But the intensification of cork forestry as a profitable industry has taken hold. The effect of stripping the tree health threatens sustainable management. So in addition to great water loss, stripping causes dangerous wounds that create pathways for many fungi. Not only are these trees depleted through rampant extractivism and a lack of responsible care, cork bark is now perilously thin due to climate change. Cork oaks struggle to grow back a layer of cork thick enough to harvest. The trees are engaged in adaptive processes in response to higher temperatures, reduced rainfall and increased exposure to UV light, i.e. global warming, and an attempt to offset increased radiation levels. So these are the feral effects of the Anthropocene that Anna Zing urges us to attune to. Intense extractivism, characteristic of the Plantationocene, causes environmental and capitalist devastation. Bark strippers are instructed to disinfect axes, use to peel self-regenerating cork bark to avoid overstripping, but this is an ongoing battle with the soil-carried fungus, who is currently winning. Next slide, please. So the granular storytelling presented in this paper with cork responds to Anna Zing's insistence that there is an imperative to tell really terrible stories about what's going on in the world. She argues that we put aside hopeful stories and relearn the arts of dystopian storytelling that's necessary for our ability to cultivate ways to think of the present as a complex tangle of times and places in which cultivating responsibilities and capacities to respond matters. These multiple and interwoven stories across time and place matter because they underline the wider responsibilities and implications of daily practices undertaken by the early childhood teacher and researcher in the name of environmental education, and the imperative then becomes to learn again. Next slide, please. Learning again is something that those connected to early childhood might take to the heart of their practice, with a willingness to set aside a sense of mastery and expertise. Possibilities are presented for childlike, embodied, affective, sensory encounters that allow for attunement to the world's becoming in a different key. By generating these uncomfortable narratives, stories that have unfurled from serious yet playful encounters with cork, we are forced to contemplate our infected and affected place in the world. Final slide, please. And that's just a layering of everything that has, well, I hope it is, that has been conjured through the paper and this effective research methodology.
That was so amazing, Jayne. I found the layering absolutely transfixing, and the theories and the depth of your thinking going into those spaces and showing us all that felt very, very, very exciting. I was kind of tweeting, and me and Joe, who's I think on the call, was really, really enjoying the way the slides were working. They worked really, really well, actually. I'm going to stop sharing them unless anyone wants them to be still there, so we can have a discussion. Does that sound like a good idea? And Peter, you're here as well. I'm really sorry, where I am is a bit noisy, but I'm hoping that we can all start to talk through some of the really important questions you raised. And I mean, I just appreciated that so much. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to stop presenting. Yay! I feel almost human now. It was very strange when it was just your sides. Can everyone see each other a bit better? Is that a bit more friendly as an environment to do chatting in?
I can see lots of circles with initials
you-
in.
Yeah. So what we might do is just have a chat. It could be we go back into some of that work because it was so incredible. We've got one question up in the chat from Joe. Do you want to ask the question, Joe? So we can, I mean, my feeling about this is we need time both to think together, but also appreciate the line inquiry you sent us on. So we went all the way to Australia, we went into Norway. I didn't know about the oaks and the forest and the old oaks, but also we went into spaces of